would you follow Kier Starmer into battle?
No.
No,
Yeah.
right? And
But Boris Johnson was charismatic. I also wouldn't follow him. I would not follow Boris Johnson into battle either.
fair enough. Fair enough. But there was, and I'm not a massive Boris backer, but he did have the capacity to at least at times unite a nation. And you need someone who has got that in their locker, that you feel as though could do a bit of a tub thumping speech, could get the public going. It says something, I think, about British society. So it says something about problems with integration and cultural issues that we've had. The police and I think local councils turned a blind eye for political advantage or for not wanting to seem racist. It speaks a lot about the political class, which is that the idea of trying to sweep something that massive under the rug. I get a little bit frustrated when I see some other people come out, and it's usually in the wake of quite a scary knife attack that you then start to see the pushback of, well, actually fewer people have been stabbed to death this year than the year before. All right, well, how many stabbings are okay then?
On today's Daily Expresso, we're joined by a man who has made a career out of being loudly, proudly, and sometimes controversially British. Patrick Christys is one of GB News' most recognisable presenters. He's a broadcaster, a commentator, a dad, and depending on who you ask, a much-needed voice of common sense. I think you thought I was going to say something else then, didn't you, Patrick?
I did, but I'm glad it was that. Yeah.
Welcome to the Daily Expresso, my man.
Thank you.
Let's jump straight in.
Okay.
What do you think is wrong with Britain today?
Oh, my gosh, what a start that is. Okay. Well, I think you could argue that there's a problem right at the top, and if you look at the top, that would have to be the government. I think there are serious question marks about whether or not they are particularly patriotic, and you can go all the way back, given various different previous careers, things they've said in the past, professions that they've done in the past, all of that, whether or not they actually do want to put the British people first. And I think that's been exemplified a bit by some of the things that we've seen to do with the Chagos deal and all of that. So there's that. So that's a problem. I think that we also have ruined a bit the idea of fairness in a lot of aspects of British society. I think we used to be a country where if you went out and you worked hard and you put your shoulder to the wheel, you could have a social contract there, which is that you could earn your money, and you would have to have earned it, but you would earn your money. You could then, expect some basic things in life. So, to be able to provide for your family, maybe to be able to get on the housing ladder, you could expect your child to go to the local school and for that school to be safe. You could expect all of these basic things, pretty fundamental basic things. That doesn't appear to exist anymore. So I think we've got big issues there, and of course. I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about this. One of the big issues in this country at the moment is how we handle the rapid levels of change that we've seen in this society due to mass migration, both legal and illegal, for the best part of the last, say, 20 years or so. How we come together as a society and deal with that, because at the moment I think it's fair to say that we're pretty fragmented. Things haven't really worked. So there's lots there. That would just be my initial kind of broad brush stuff.
Yeah. Do you think for the working class, things have gotten to the worst point possibly in the last 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of people, when I think working class, I kind of think, kind of tradespeople. I think people who, obviously have to get up early doors in the morning, do a lot of hard graft, and then, come home relatively late at night. People who, do live paycheck to paycheck. Those are the kind of people that I'm thinking of when I'm talking about working class. I think it has got incredibly tough for them, because now a lot of them are going to find out that they're actually in a higher tax bracket, which is nuts. I mean, that's nuts. And that goes right the way across, by the way, to nurses, police officers, let alone obviously people who, so maybe some people are doing particularly well for themselves in terms of like brickies and scaffolders and all of that stuff. I think they feel as though they've been fundamentally very let down. And I think that what's changed there is that there used to be the carrot that was dangled, that like, right, okay, maybe if you put the hard yards in now and you do take that call out on Christmas Eve and it's freezing and you go out and you go and fix a leak at someone's house, or you're out on the side of a motorway at like 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve in the driving snow, if you do that for a few years, you can work your way up, like my granddad did, really. I mean, my granddad was a classic kind of Irish builder, right, and then worked his way up and by the end of his life had, kind of got to owning his own construction company and all of that stuff. That progression there, I fear that has gone a bit. And if you remove that carrot from people's lives, it's easy to remove the hope.
Yeah.
And that can create a lot of division, a lot of anger, and a lot of resentment in society. And I'm worried that's where we are. And I think for a lot of working class people as well, certainly the people that I speak to, they feel as though they're being made to pay for a lot of other stuff that they don't particularly necessarily agree with. I know the old trope used to be like, oh, it's all going in foreign aid, and we're paying for, there's the news articles that I'm sure I and you have written over the years about, like, paying for things like Kenyan rainmakers and people like this, and there's the latest one was this road to nowhere in Guyana, wasn't it? I think 50 odd million quid was it, or something for a road to nowhere in Guyana. All of that stuff. But there's also things going on here. I mean, we've seen huge issues when it comes to benefits in this country, and huge question marks over where we are as a society with that. And I think a lot of people are feeling that they're being asked to work harder for less money to maybe give to people who maybe aren't as bothered about work as they are. And that's a big problem, I think.
Yeah. Do you think the country is moving more to the right? Reform are very popular at the moment. Or have the left just gone so far left that they've made everyone look like we're now right of centre?
Yeah, it's a great question, this, because...
Thank you.
There you go. Because, so I've just got back from Merthyr Tydfil in Wales, which has been a Labour stronghold, voted Labour for more than 100 years. The founder of the Labour Party, Keir, that used to be his constituency. So that is died in the wool, Labour, etc. So let's think about what they used to be. So that used to have, like, tens of coal mines, used to have factories, like the Hoover factory that was there employed 5,000 people. So every single coal mine is now shut, and so is the Hoover factory. So, that old kind of unionist Labour area, that's left them. They've not really changed. The people there haven't changed. I'm absolutely certain that a lot of them would want to still do all those jobs that used to exist there. So the Labour Party, I think, has left them. The Labour Party has decided to adopt various different kind of woke things. I'm not sure how many people that are dyed in the wool working class Labour voters that had traditional kind of manual jobs, as it were, are absolutely energised about the trans movement, for example. Labour seems to have been quite focused on that for quite a while. So I think there is a massive case to say that the quotes-unquote left-wing parties in Britain have left their voters, not that their voters have left them. I do also think, though, that we have maybe reached a bit of a tipping point in this country where, again, it cuts back to that idea of fairness, where a lot of people have maybe just had enough of things like a migrant hotel in their area, rapid change, rapid cultural change as well, parts of Birmingham, Leicester, etc., where I think people have now thought, well, we were very kind and welcoming and open for the most part, and that maybe that's that we've had a bit of enough of this now, and that makes people maybe go a little bit more to the right. But yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a combination of those two things, and really for a long time, the Conservative Party, in my view, didn't really conserve anything, and we had 14 years there of them, saying some of the right things, but doing things that I think their core voter base didn't really like. I think they got very complacent. And now there is an alternative. People might like this, people might not like this, but the fact is reform does exist now, and they are, at least saying that they are, the Conservative Party in that sense politically. So they exist now. So perhaps people feel as though there is a place for them to go.
So do you think the Tories are done for? Is this it for them?
I think Badenoch's had a really great couple of weeks, don't get me wrong, and it was a slow start, and it's a difficult job, and no one's saying that it's easy. The big problem, I think, is that I don't think people are going to forgive and forget when it comes to the Tories for a very long period of time. Like I said, the clue should be in the name with the Tories. They're supposed to conserve things. They didn't really conserve Britain. And if you're in power, if any party is in power for that length of time, then ultimately everything suddenly becomes your fault. So I don't think the British public are going to be that particularly forgiving to them. I think they'll be sympathetic towards Kemi in the situation she's inherited. I think a lot of people are, pretty in favour of Robert Jenrick. I also think when you look at some of the things that we've seen, the farcical things we've seen in the House of Commons recently, Rachel Reeves standing up in Parliament and delivering that disaster budget. You see Mel Stride, who's now our opposite number, who suddenly just looks a lot more competent. You know, David Lammy clearly, had an absolute horror show. I mean, it was ridiculous, wasn't it? An absolute horror show the other week. So anyone who's on the other side of that suddenly looks more competent. So I think in the general public psyche, people are looking at the Tories front bench and thinking, right, I do think you would probably do a better job of running the country than this clown show that we've got at the moment. However, we put our trust in you for a long period of time, and you let us down. And I think it's probably going to be another election on from this before people are willing to forgive, I think.
Do you think... I've a sip of your coffee. You're dying to.
That's all right, yeah.
I just don't see Reform winning enough outright. I think it's possible there could be a hung parliament, but I think Labour, the Lib Dems, maybe even the Greens, they'll do everything they can to unite to stop. It's almost like a moral mission for those people now.
Yeah.
They just want to stop Nigel Farage from getting into power.
I think this is going to be a really, really interesting thing that happens in politics, because for the first past the post system to work, I wonder if we've now almost got too many parties that could all win a decent chunk of votes.
Yeah.
So the Lib Dems are being incredibly quiet about this Labour omnishambles, and I would argue suspiciously quiet. I think that they are maybe already behind the scenes thinking that their next route into government could be a little bit like what they did with the Tories under Nick Clegg and David Cameron, which is to go into a coalition.
Yeah.
The danger for British society, the thing that I fear a lot about is that I do think that we are a bit of a powder keg at the moment, and we've seen that really over numerous different flashpoints, the Southport massacre, etc. My concern would be that Reform wins the most votes and they win the most seats, but it's not enough for a majority.
Yeah.
And the Tories come fourth. And we end up with this coalition of Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens, possibly propped up by some of those quite fruity independents as well. The first concern I have with that is I don't think that's a workable government. I mean, I think that would be chaos, because I don't think they can agree on enough. And there are huge issues there. We saw it with the Your Party thing, and we're going to see it with the Greens, where they've got a huge cornerstone of the kind of pro-Gaza but also socially conservative Muslim voter bloc, and then a lot of your more traditional Green Party, you know, left-wing, pro-trans brigade. And as we're seeing, there are clashes to be had there. But I also just think in the public psychology, if Reform wins, you know, a huge number of votes and a huge number of seats, and we end up with a really quite radically left-wing kind of Frankenstein-type government, I just think that the public aren't really going to consent to that massively. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I would be very concerned about what could happen in Britain after that, I think.
You think the country could riot?
Yeah, well, we've seen it, haven't we? So, I mean, we know it can. And I don't know if they'd singularly riot over the fact that, you know, we find out one morning in a few years' time that actually they've managed to form this coalition. I don't know if just I think there will be protests on the street about that. I think we'd see demonstrations, you know, and like organised protests. Yeah, but I think that the problem would be is that with any government, you know, big events happen, flashpoints happen. Is there going to be some kind of terror attack, or is there going to be? And it's how they deal with those things. And if the public feel as though yet again. Because I think a lot of people feel as though, you know, people can argue about the rights and wrongs of Brexit, but obviously that was a referendum and the Brexit side won. And then there is that sense for a lot of people that they didn't enact the result of that referendum. Then you've got people who did vote consistently for parties, including, by the way, this Labour government, to reduce illegal immigration, to reduce net migration. Well, certainly in the case of illegal immigration, that's not been reduced. There's more of it. So we're coming off the back of people feeling consistently now for the best part of 20 years that they've voted for one thing and they've been lied to, and then they've got another. And so if we were to see that scenario like you can see coming, and I can maybe see coming as well, at the next election, where they've voted for one thing, which would be, you know, maybe a reform government, and they get something radically different. I don't see social cohesion benefiting from that at all.
I do think the country is more divided than ever. I think it started, for me, when Scotland were trying to get independence, and then a few years after that, then it's Brexit. COVID disrupted everything, and the Tories were terrible. Then we've got Labour. Fantastic. The adults are in charge. No, the adults are now seemingly worse than the Tories were. But who's to blame for the division in the country, or what?
Gosh. Well, I mean, I think incompetent leadership and a lack of charismatic leadership. So I personally believe that, obviously, no one wants a dictatorship, don't get me wrong, but people want to be led. I think you need a figurehead.
Yeah.
And for a long time, of course, despite the fact that she was not political and everything, we had the Queen, didn't we? And I think I think a bit of Britain died that day with her, sadly. And that was certainly one of my overbearing feelings at the time. You know, you've got the loss and the grief of that monarch who's been around for such a long period of time and guided Britain and been an ever-present in Britain through some incredibly difficult times. But I think she also stood for something more than that. I think she stood for a version of Britain, and that went with her, I feel. And now we have someone in the shape of Kier Starmer and really everyone around him who is very uncharismatic. I don't think has a handle on the pulse of the British people, and is incapable of rallying people around. And we saw that with the welfare vote. So that was a big moment, It was a big moment where we had the opportunity to make welfare reforms that could have shaped a future budget and a future economy in Britain and set the direction. Now, he spent the best part of the 2 weeks leading up to that on foreign trips, whether it was to do with NATO, I think it was, might have been the UN. And he's, okay, you could argue important trips that he should have been on. But then he should have been at home, whipping his MPs, doing speeches in Downing Street, doing videos for the nation about, look, this is uncomfortable. This is why we need to do it. This is why we need welfare reform. This is why we need to restructure Britain's economy. He didn't do any of that. There was the whiff of a Labour rebellion. He just caved over. Rachel Reeves ends up crying in Parliament, and it was just an absolute horror show. We are not led by someone, I think. I mean, would you follow Kier Starmer into battle?
No.
No. Yeah. Right?
But Boris Johnson was charismatic. I also wouldn't follow him. I would not follow Boris Johnson into battle either.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But there was, and I'm not a massive Boris backer. I think actually post Boris, some of the facts and figures that we've had coming out about things like the Boris wave. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, But he did have the capacity to at least at times unite a nation, right? He did. And you need someone who has got that in their locker that you feel as though, could do a bit of a tub-thumping speech, could get the public going. So at the moment, there's a vacuum at the top. And that I think leads to a lot of division in society. I think a lot of people, when you don't feel led, then there's a lot of chaos that can happen there.
Well, charisma, Zach Polansky of the Greens, he is charismatic. I would much rather follow him and be inspired by him than I am by Starmer. And I think the fact that Labour are putting out adverts attacking the Green Party, 5 years ago, no one would have been saying, "Oh, watch out for the Green Party, they might steal some people's votes." They were nothing. The stereotype is there, as you say, a bunch of liberals. They mostly live in Brighton. They go picking daisies on weekends or whatever. They're all vegans. They look like they need a wash. They've got pink and green hair. Do you know what I mean? But now they've got a leader who I think actually, if he wasn't government, I would find him charismatic. I would go with some of the things that he's convincing the country to do.
I think that some of the issues that Polansky is going to face is that at the moment he's kind of flavour of the month. He's this new shiny thing. And from when I've seen him interviewed and stuff, don't get me wrong, I think he comes across as quite a human bloke, right? Which is more, again, that's another issue we've got with Kier Starmer. I mean, it looks like you can turn him off and on again in the back, doesn't it? But, Zach Polansky's got some human qualities there. I mean, there are issues there. Like, I know that he tries to swerve this, but there's the easy joke about the old hypno tits, There's that. I mean, his real name's Dave, right? So there's that. And then you have a look at what some of his ideas actually are. As we get closer to a general election and we see these leadership debates, he is going to have to face serious questions about what some of his actual policies are.
Yeah.
When it comes to big things like tax, like nuclear, all of this stuff. And the reality is that he does have some quite fruity ideas that I'm not convinced appeal to more than 50% of the nation at all. So I think he's going to face big issues there, and I think he might come unstuck. We saw recently he was on what's it? The Rest Is Politics, is it? With Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, which I must say I'm not a huge fan of. I see largely as quite.
Could you not plug other rival podcasts?
Well, I don't think. Sorry. Well, firstly, I don't think they're rivals actually, because they. I don't understand why people particularly listen to them. But anyway, there was a question they asked him about is what economist does he listen to, and he basically named like two communists,
Gary,
and one bloke who used to work in the city, who may or may not have been the best trader in the world. Just don't you think? Okay, you trust him with the economy? So I think he's gonna come unstuck with things like that. But again, the fact that Zach Polansky exists and is proving to be at least relatively popular is a reaction to, I think,
Yeah.
how catastrophically awful the establishment parties have been and are at the moment. And for people scratching their heads and wondering about, oh my gosh, how can anyone like Zach Polanski? How can anyone vote for him? They need to look a bit closer to home. How have we allowed a situation to happen where someone that potentially, I'm not a massive fan of Gordon Brown, for example, but I think Gordon Brown would have probably swatted him aside because he had a bit of a heavyweight gravitas thing. So the idea that Zach Polanski can exist in this particular country and people are talking about him in the terms that we are now, I think a lot of the establishment parties have to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I agree with that. I think you're right there. You touched earlier about on the trans issue. I would say trans, knife crime, grooming gangs, these are topics that are spoken about hugely across the media industry, but they affect such a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people. In reality, 99% of people in the country are not affected by any of these issues, but they still dominate the spaces. Why is that?
Okay, so I would push back a bit on that. So I think that the trans issue does actually affect everyone, because I think the issue of men in women's spaces is something everyone's got, like a mum or a daughter or a wife or a grandma or whatever. So I think people can very easily place themselves in a position where they think, would I want a man in any of those spaces? So I think it's easy then for it to literally affect everybody. I think, again, with the grooming gangs issue, the rape gangs issue there, for me, that is actually a much broader issue than, okay, so we had potentially, hundreds of thousands of vulnerable, predominantly working class white girls, abused on an industrial scale, but again, predominantly Pakistani or British Pakistani men. So it's not just about the girls that impacted and their families that impacted. It says something, I think, about British society. So it says something about problems with integration and cultural issues that we've had. It also the fact that the police and I think local councils turned a blind eye for political advantage or for not wanting to seem racist. I think people can see that playing out in other aspects of society as well. I think then as well it speaks a lot about the political class, which is that the idea of trying to sweep something that massive under the rug. And the Tories are, by the way, I think the Tories are, they're talking a great game on it now. Yeah. I don't think they're getting enough stick for the fact that a lot of this happened, A, under their watch, and B, they're more vocal about it in opposition now than they ever were in power. Yeah. So, there is that. So it speaks to the political class at whole. And you think, if they can ignore that as something as graphic and as horrible as that, and that they can try and sweep that under the rug for as long a time as they did, what else are they lying to us about? What else are they capable of covering up? So again, all right, I take your point, which is that maybe when you look at as a percentage of population, so the 70-odd million people we've got in Britain, but I do think these are issues that affect everybody. I think that's why they're so big.
Because look, you look at knife crime. Okay, we know it's bad in the major cities. Granted, I live in London. The chance of me being stabbed to death, I've got more chance of being attacked by a shark in the sea than I have of getting actually stabbed to death. So actually, it doesn't actually affect me. It may emotionally make me feel London's not safe. You know what I mean? And that plays into it. But actually, I'm unlikely to be a victim of knife crime, being a 41-year-old now middle class man.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to the crime stuff, I must admit I get a little bit frustrated when I see some other people come out. And it's usually in the wake of quite a scary knife attack that you then start to see the pushback of, well, actually, fewer people have been stabbed to death this year than the year before. There is, instinctively, there's that bit of me that goes, all right, well, how many stabbings are okay then?
Yeah.
Right? But for me, it's symptomatic of a wider issue, which is that low-level crime appears to be up. So, like, shoplifting is through the roof. Yeah. There's a Tesco Express that I sometimes stop in on the way home from work late at night, and they have, like, a shoplifting quota for the day. So sometimes I'll just go and the doors are shut, and I'm like, why are the doors shut? And then obviously people have nicked too much stuff today. And you're like, okay. And then you see the videos of them not really stopping anyone because they don't want to get stabbed. And then you see the things about, like, how many precautions do we have to take just to prevent a terrorist attack at the moment. So when you see things like the
Yeah.
Christmas, it's the time of year for Christmas markets, isn't it? So we've got the bollards everywhere, and then you've got like airport security at Winter Wonderland, and you think, okay, so we haven't had a car drive through any of these places, and we haven't had, someone let a bomb off at these places. But is that not really more because we're taking so many precautions in our life now, as opposed to there's a reduction in the number of people that want to do that to us? CCTV and things like that can have a big impact when it comes to maybe preventing some of these things. So, look, I think there's a fine line to be had between people who want to, maybe for political gain, present Britain as some kind of lawless, violent hellscape where it's unsafe to leave your front door, which we're not, right? We're not. But at the same time, I think that there is also an attempt to brush under the phone theft, for example, again. And there is that perception of police inaction. Like, there was when they recently made this big song and dance about how they smashed this phone gang, and it turned out that a load of phones ended up in like Hong Kong or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was a big, and ultimately, from my understanding of that, that came because one very proactive woman who had a tracker on her phone was like, I'm not going to let this go. I'm going to be, and I'm showing you where this phone is now. But how many thousands of people had their phone nicked in the meantime, in the interim period?
Yeah.
And could the police not have done a bit more about that and tracking them? So I get what people are saying, but for me, I think I do feel as though there is more of a risk out there. Thankfully, the actual horrific incidents of things like mass stabbings, etc., appear to be down. But I think people are right to be fearful of it, and I think there's that broken windows argument where if all the other little things are up, but drugs basically appear to have been decriminalised in a lot of places, not officially, but they do. So you've got all of that lower level crime, and then there's the more major stuff. I think I get a little bit annoyed when people downplay the scale of the major stuff, because I do think we have the capacity to really fall off the cliff there when it comes to knife crime.
Well, I don't think there should be petty crime and serious crime. It's crime. You break the law. You break the law. We shouldn't be saying, "Oh, well, he stole less than 100 quid. We're not going to bother investigating that." No, investigate it. That's the job. Anyway, I'll talk about that all day, but I won't. We'll get off it. I think one of the things I like about you is that you do speak common sense most of the time, Patrick. Most of the time.
Not always.
Not always, but most of the time. So listen to this bonkers story. NHS nurse who is facing the sack for misgendering a bearded paedophile. So this is Jennifer Mell. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. She was hauled before a disciplinary hearing for speaking publicly about receiving racial abuse. She's a black woman. She received racial abuse from a 6-foot man with a beard who was taken to hospital because he had a urinary infection from prison. Wow. He's there with 2 guards. She called him Mister. He then kicked off and started, being racist to her. Yep. She then had to face a disciplinary for misgendering the man, and she spoke openly about it. And then the hospital then said, "Well, you've now possibly identified that man, so now you could possibly face a sack."
Yeah.
Common sense has gone out the freaking window.
Yeah, I interviewed her actually. I spoke to her.
Wonderful!
And it's kind of got the full miserable bingo card of everything going on this story, because she is also a devout Christian, and this was one of the things that she apparently said to this bloke. Which was, look, I'm not going to suspend my Christian beliefs. He then proceeded to call her some of the most horrific things, the N-word repeatedly and all that stuff. And she's been hauled before disciplinary. She's had numerous different hearings. I mean, she said to me that she's had like a hearing every couple of months, which is just a complete repeat of the same thing. Yeah. So she feels as though she's been discriminated against, firstly, because of her Christian beliefs, because she doesn't want to, kind of subscribe to this kind of gender fantasy that's going on at the moment. She was racially abused. They don't seem to care about that. No. The NHS doesn't seem to care about protecting a staff member from abuse. And the NHS, which is ultimately our health body, appears to be willing to suspend biological fact for the sake of it. It is an insane story, but unfortunately it's one of many that are coming out about the NHS. You've also got the case of the Darlington nurses. So these are obviously nurses in Darlington, clues in the name, female nurses, and they had a changing room. And there was a bloke who, with still full tackle intact, who has a wife, right? And he one day was just in their changing rooms, and they were like, "Oh, I don't really know about this." He started asking them questions as well, like quite pervy questions, they felt, about like, taking a while to get changed and stuff. So they reported that to whoever they reported it to, the NHS Trust. They are then told that they're being transphobic. They're hauled before an inquiry. They are told that they have to have a new changing room, which is just a broom cupboard on the side there, and that they face being suspended. So again, the NHS was willing to suspend like 7 or 8 nurses when we need as many nurses as we can possibly get for the sake of trying to appease one bloke who essentially wants to dress up as a woman because at home he's got a wife. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating to what does this reveal as well. Like certainly in the case of this lady who didn't want to refer to a trans paedophile, it almost reveals like a hierarchy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So racial abuse is secondary to the trans community, to misgendering someone. And we're seeing a lot of this in society now, aren't we? About this hierarchy of what's worse, right? And what's worse. But there was, just to round us off on that, she actually said something to me that I thought was utterly heartbreaking, which was that because she is an immigrant. She's come to this country, and she basically said to me, look, I just wanted to come to this country and help people, and it is her dream. She'd always dreamed of being a nurse. Wow. And she's not complaining about the fact that they almost definitely deserve to have better pay. She's not complaining about the fact that their working hours are shocking. She's not complaining about the fact that sometimes in her day-to-day work, she has to come up and treat a paedophile who's shackled to 2 prison officers, which is bad enough. She's not complaining about any of that. All she wants to do is to be able to go and do her job. And we have some management in the NHS that are willing to suspend her and possibly sack her because a trans paedophile has kicked off.
It's nuts.
After racially abusing. It's nuts. It's nuts.
Bonkers. Patrick Christys, thank you very much, mate. Absolute pleasure having you on.
That was all right. I enjoyed it.
5 out of 10. Yeah. not the best one I've had, but it'll do.
All right, good. All right. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming in, man. You can catch Patrick Monday to Friday at 9 p.m. on GB News and maybe occasionally on here again in the future. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.